Hello, my name is Daniel, and this is a story I've never shared with anyone before. It happened on a New Year's Eve years ago, and even now the memory chills me to my very core. It changed me in ways I still struggle to understand. Maybe sharing it will help me find some closure. It was supposed to be a quiet night. I'd just moved into an old house in a sleepy town, trying to escape the chaos of the city and the ghosts of my past. You see, I'd been running from something for years, though I didn't quite know what. Ever since I was a child, strange things had always seemed to happen around me. Lights flickering, whispers in the dark, objects disappearing only to reappear in the most unlikely places. My parents always brushed it off, saying I had an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. There was one incident when I was 9 years old. A shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. That night, I screamed until my voice gave out, but no one ever believed me. There was another incident when I was 11. My parents had taken me to visit my grandparents' farm for the summer. I was exploring the barn alone when I noticed something strange, a mirror leaning against the wall, reflecting not the barn, but a dark, endless corridor. I remember stepping closer, drawn to the eerie sight. And then, it happened. A pale hand reached out from the mirror, its fingers curling as if to grab me. I fell back, screaming, and my grandfather came running. But when he arrived, the mirror was gone. He told me it had been broken and discarded years ago. That night, I overheard my grandparents whispering about how I had the gift. I never found out what they meant, but I never forgot that hand. Fast forward to December 31st. I'd planned a solitary New Year's Eve, a bottle of wine and a stack of old horror movies to keep me company. The house was cold despite the roaring fire I'd built in the hearth. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I tried to shake off the unease, blaming it on the old house. By 10 p.m., the wind outside had picked up, howling like a wounded animal. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight I'd left on the coffee table and made my way to the kitchen to check the breaker. As I passed the window, I froze. There was someone outside. A figure, standing at the edge of the woods, illuminated by the faint moonlight. They weren't moving, just like the figure from my childhood. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, maybe even a deer or a tree stump. But deep down, I knew better. I forced myself to the breaker box, but all the switches were in place. As I stood there, heart pounding, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the kitchen window. Tap, tap, tap. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. It's just the wind, I muttered, trying to convince myself. But then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I crept to the window and peered out. The figure was closer now, standing at the edge of the garden. My breath caught in my throat. It was taller than any person I'd ever seen, its limbs impossibly long and thin. Its face was wrong, not human, distorted. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. That's when I heard the front door creak open. I hadn't even locked it. Heart racing, I ran to the hallway, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The door was wide open, swinging gently in the wind. But no one was there. I slammed it shut, bolting the lock, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That's when I smelled it. A faint, acrid scent, like burnt hair. It was coming from the living room. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of the house, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Slowly, I made my way back to the living room. The fire in the hearth had gone out, leaving only smoldering embers. And in the ashes, there was something new. Footprints. Bare, human-like, but too large, with claw-like impressions at the tips. They led from the hearth to the center of the room, then vanished. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. There was no response, just the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, darker than the rest, shifting, moving. It slid across the wall like liquid, coalescing into a shape. And then I heard the voice. Low, guttural, and inhuman, it spoke my name. "Daniel." I dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. Panic took over, and I scrambled blindly toward the door. But the moment I reached it, it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. I screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the voice came again, closer this time. "You can't run from me." Suddenly, it all came rushing back. The shadow at the foot of my bed when I was 9. The whispers in the dark. The objects that moved on their own. The mirror at my grandparents' farm. I'd spent my entire life trying to forget, to deny what I'd seen. But it had never left me. It had been waiting, watching, and now it was here. The room grew colder, the air thick with the scent of decay. I turned, and there it was, standing in the center of the room. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. It didn't answer, but its smile widened. Raising a bony hand, it pointed at me. Suddenly, a crushing pressure gripped my chest, stealing my breath. My vision blurred as I collapsed to my knees, gasping. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure vanished. The figure was gone, but the dread lingered. Time blurred. Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell. Sitting on the cold floor, I realized this wasn't random. That figure had waited, tracking every New Year's Eve, watching every change I tried to make. It had been waiting for this moment. At dawn, soft golden light filled the room. I didn't sleep that night, or for a long time after. The next day, I moved out, abandoning everything. Yet, I can't shake the feeling it's still out there, waiting to return. If you're hearing this on New Year's Eve, heed my warning. Don't be alone. Lock your doors, light your fires, and don't ignore the things that go bump in the night, because sometimes they're not just in your head.
Hi, my name is Mark, and I have always hated New Year's Eve. For most people, it's a time of joy, celebration, and resolutions. But for me, it's a reminder of something that happened years ago, a night that I've spent my life trying to forget. This is my story. It was my first time coming back home for New Year's. After spending nearly 10 years at boarding school, my parents had sent me away when I was just a boy. They said it was for my education, but deep down, I knew it was because of the strange things that happened around me. When I was a kid, our house had always felt alive. Doors would creak open on their own, shadows moved where no one should have been, and the whispers, soft, fleeting words that no one else seemed to hear. My parents called it my wild imagination, but I saw the fear in their eyes whenever something unexplainable happened. That fear, I think, was what led them to send me away. Coming back after so long felt surreal. The house looked the same, though it seemed older, as if it had been weighed down by the years. My parents were thrilled to see me, showering me with hugs and questions about my life. For a moment, I almost forgot the unease that had always clung to this place. But it didn't take long for the memories to resurface. That night, as I unpacked in my old room, I noticed something strange. The mirror above my dresser, an ornate antique, wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. It was massive, with a gilded frame and glass that seemed to ripple faintly like water. When I asked my mom about it, she shrugged and said it had been there for years. I didn't press further, but something about that mirror set me on edge. We had a small gathering that evening, just close friends and family. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of spiced cider. For a while, I allowed myself to relax, even smile. Maybe this year would be different, I thought. Maybe the past could finally stay buried. Around 11 p.m., the power went out. The guests groaned, pulling out their phones for light, but I felt my chest tighten. The last time the power had gone out in this house, I'd been 8 years old. That was the night I saw her for the first time. I was walking to the bathroom when I noticed a girl standing at the end of the hall. She was pale, her hair dark and matted, her eyes wide and unblinking. I froze, calling out to her, but she didn't respond. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed toward my room. When I turned back to look, she was gone. That night, my favorite toy went missing, and I'd wake up to hear faint giggles, as if someone was playing with it in the dark. The adults joked about the power outage, blaming the storm outside. I tried to laugh along, but my unease grew with every passing minute. Midnight was approaching, and the house felt off. Too quiet, despite the chatter, too dark, even with the flickering candles. As I moved through the house, checking on the guests, I found myself drawn to my old room. The door was slightly ajar, and the faintest hint of that acrid smell, like burnt hair, wafted out. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The mirror was the first thing I noticed. Its surface seemed to shimmer, reflecting not just the room, but something else. A shadowy figure moved within it, separate from my own reflection. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. The figure grew clearer, its features taking shape. It was her, the girl from my childhood. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my old desk chair. The girl's face pressed against the glass as if trying to push through. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, the lights flickered back on, and the mirror went still. The girl was gone. When I returned to the party, my parents noticed my pale face and asked if I was okay. I lied, forcing a smile and saying the power outage had spooked me, but my mind was racing. Why had I seen her again after all these years? As the clock struck 12, everyone cheered, glasses clinking as confetti rained down. I tried to join in, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, and that smell, burnt hair and decay, was back. Then, over the din of celebration, I heard it, a giggle. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise, but unmistakable. I turned toward the sound, and there she was, standing at the edge of the room. No one else seemed to notice her. She tilted her head, her gaze locking onto mine, and raised her hand to point at the mirror in the hallway. Compelled by something I couldn't explain, I walked toward the mirror. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the shadows deepening with every step. When I reached the mirror, the girl was already there, her reflection staring back at me, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, dozens of shadowy figures crowded the glass, their eyes glowing faintly. Their mouths moved silently as if chanting. My heart pounded as the girl reached out, her hand pressing against the glass. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and the figures behind her began to move. The mirror shattered, and the room plunged into darkness. I heard screams, not just mine, but from the guests. The figures had escaped, their shapes darting through the house like living shadows. The girl stood amidst the chaos, her eyes fixed on me. When the sun rose, the house was empty. My parents, the guests, everyone was gone. The only evidence of the night's events was the shattered mirror and the faint smell of decay lingering in the air. I left that house and never returned. Even now, I don't know what happened to the others, but every New Year's Eve, I hear that giggle, and I know she's still out there waiting. If you ever come across an old mirror, be careful. Some reflections aren't meant to be seen, and some things can't be escaped no matter how far you run.
Hi, my name is Eric. Like most people, I used to think New Year's Eve was a night for celebration, a chance to hit reset and welcome new beginnings. But now, it's a night I dread, a reminder of something I can't escape. Let me tell you what happened that one fateful New Year's Eve. It started innocently enough. I'd moved to a new city 6 months earlier for work. I didn't know many people yet, so when I got an unexpected invitation to a New Year's Eve party, I jumped at the chance. The invite was simple, A white card with gold lettering reading, "You're invited to ring in the new year, midnight at the Ashcroft House." No address, no RSVP instructions, just those words. At first, I thought it might have been sent to the wrong person, but the envelope was addressed to me, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. I'd been feeling homesick, missing friends and family. Maybe this was a sign to put myself out there. After a quick search online, I found an old map showing an Ashcroft house on the outskirts of town. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion, rumored to be abandoned. The idea of a party there intrigued me. Maybe it was some kind of urban exploration event, or a quirky gathering of artists. Either way, I was in. The drive was eerie. Snow blanketed the road, and the GPS signal kept cutting out. The closer I got, the more desolate the surroundings became. Finally, I saw it. The Ashcroft house. Its silhouette loomed against the moonlit sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The driveway was lined with flickering lanterns, casting long shadows across the snow. I parked and stepped out, the cold biting through my coat. There were no other cars, but the faint hum of music drifted through the air. The house seemed alive with activity, despite its decrepit appearance. As I climbed the creaking steps, the front door swung open on its own. Warm light spilled out, and I hesitated before stepping inside. The foyer was lavish, with crystal chandeliers and ornate furniture. Guests in vintage clothing mingled, their laughter echoing through the halls. It felt like stepping back in time. I grabbed a drink from a passing waiter and struck up a conversation with a woman in a flapper dress. Her name was Claire, and she spoke with a lilting accent I couldn't place. The guests seemed friendly enough, but something was off. Their clothing wasn't just vintage, it was authentic, as if they'd stepped out of another era. When I mentioned the peculiar invitation, Claire's smile faltered for a moment. She excused herself and disappeared into the crowd. Unease settled in my chest, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. As midnight approached, the energy in the room shifted. The laughter quieted, and the guests gathered in a circle around the grand staircase. A man in a sharp three-piece suit stepped forward, his voice booming as he raised a glass. "To new beginnings and honored guests," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. The room erupted in applause, but I felt like a spotlight had been turned on me. My discomfort grew as the crowd began to chant. Their words were low and guttural, in a language I didn't recognize. The man gestured for me to join him at the base of the stairs. Reluctantly, I stepped forward, the room's atmosphere growing heavier with each step. He handed me a golden pocket watch, its hands frozen at midnight. "Welcome to the circle," he said, his smile sharp and unnatural. "The night has chosen you." Before I could respond, the chandeliers flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. The music stopped, replaced by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Shadows writhed along the walls, taking on grotesque shapes. The guests, if they were even human, began to change. Their eyes glowed faintly, their movements jerky and unnatural. Claire appeared beside me, her face pale and expressionless. "You need to leave," she whispered. "They're binding you to this place." I bolted for the door, but the house seemed to shift around me. Hallways stretched endlessly, and doors led to nowhere. The golden pocket watch burned in my hand, its frozen hands now ticking backward. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and more frantic. Claire appeared again, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a hidden passage. "This way," she urged, "before it's too late." We emerged in the basement, where a massive, ornate mirror stood against the wall. Its surface rippled like water, and dark figures moved within it. Claire turned to me, her expression grim. "You have to go through," she said. "It's the only way out." With no other option, I stepped into the mirror. Cold engulfed me, and I felt like I was falling through endless darkness. When I emerged, I was back in my apartment, the invitation still clutched in my hand. At first I thought I'd imagined it all, but the golden pocket watch sat on my nightstand, its hands still ticking backward. I tried to throw it away, but it always found its way back to me. And every year, on New Year's Eve, I hear the faint hum of that chant, calling me back to the Ashcroft house. If you ever receive an invitation that seems too good to be true, think twice before accepting it. Some parties aren't meant for the living, and some doors once opened can never be closed.